Hello everyone, this is Chapter 2, Part 2, Perspectives on Behavior. So in order for you to understand all the different perspectives, there's so many of them now, it's really important that you understand where they originated from. Um, they've really branched out across, but they all sort of came from the same beginnings, which were rooted in philosophy. So when we talk about perspectives and behavior, perspective is like a guide to understanding. Okay, it's like in education they call it your lens, the lens through which you see the world. Um, Maybe you haven't given it a lot of thought, but everyone has, say, perspectives on, say, on how learning occurs, okay, and behavior. So, for an example, imagine you're at the grocery store and there's a child who's crying and screaming at the cash. So one parent may believe that punishment is the way to teach in that situation, right? So you punish the behavior to decrease that, and that may upset others who have a different perspective. Okay, their perspective on how to teach and how to learn might be to distract the child with something else and to teach them a positive way of behaving in that situation instead. Okay, so there are two very different perspectives on how to handle the exact same situation, and those two people may disagree very much with the other person's how they feel that it should be taught. So that's how we come up. We've got the 7 major perspectives of modern psychology. You'll see other charts that may say 6 major perspectives or 8. The fact is there are many. Psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, biological, cross-cultural, evolutionary, humanistic, and there's a few other that are not here, they're in the chapter. So anyways, yeah, it's your guide to understanding and how you see the world. So let's start off with the roots. So origin, pre-1700, we're just going to touch on some of these. We're not going to go through the entire chapter paragraph by paragraph. I'm just going to go over the main concepts and help you sort of apply them and understand them further. So originally, psychology was rooted in early philosophy. Okay? So the text starts out with the mind-body dualism, one of the earliest beliefs about how to study psychology in the mind. So they believed that the mind and the body were separate. Okay, so you had your physical being, and that your mind was a spiritual entity that existed within your body. They did place the mind in the brain, but it was a spiritual entity that could not be studied. Okay, and trying to do so was basically a waste of time. It could not be done. Then came along monoism. Now they believed that the mind and the body are one. Okay, and that mental events, things that occurred in the mind, corresponded to physical changes in the brain, physical events in the brain. And this was a really important step, because what this did was it emphasized that the mind can be studied. For the first time, they're saying the mind can be studied by measuring physical changes in the brain. So at this point, they started moving more towards a science. So John Locke, around that same time, he was from the School of British Empiricism, and he introduced the concept of tabula rasa. Perhaps you've heard of that before. So he believed that humans were born, like your mind is a blank slate, okay, completely blank. And then as the child develops, as the child grows up and has more and more experiences with the world, all of those experiences get printed onto that blank slate. So mental events, the mind, everything, it's a product of physical events acting upon the mind. It's a very passive concept, but still, he maintained that the mind can be studied. And further, he ascertained that the observation is a more valid approach to discovering knowledge than a reasoning. So philosophers tended to reason the nature of the mind and the nature of psychology. And John Locke and this school, British empiricism, they took psychology in the direction of observation, using observation to analyze human behavior, and it was the beginning of the scientific method. Another early psychologist was Charles Darwin. He's one of my favorites. I wrote several papers on him in my undergrad. Anyway, so Charles Darwin, he caused quite the ruckus in the community, because while at the time philosophers were still hung on the idea that the mind was this spiritual entity, philosophical beliefs were still deeply rooted in religion, right? So they saw humans as separate from animals, like a level up from animals. But what Darwin was suggesting is that the mind is not a spiritual entity at all, but it is a biological product on the continuity between humans and species. So we were actually on the same level as species, just say more to the left, which really upset people to put humans and animals on the same level. He also argued that because of this, you can study animal behavior to learn more about human behavior. Okay, so hence using animals in labs as a more simple model, a human model, with which to learn different learning principles, behavior, memory, cognitions, all of that that they do there. The other theory that Darwin put forth, of course, was the natural selection, which stated that organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and reproduce more than those that are less adapted. You've got your very unfortunate short-necked giraffes there who perished, while the ones with the longer necks, they adapted to the higher heights of the trees, and they were able to eat, and they were able to survive. So now we've hit the end of the 1800s. Right? We're starting to go into the 1900s. Psychology is now moving towards like a more scientific approach with observation. The mind can now be studied. It can be studied by differences in mental activity that's happening. Okay, and then during that time, structuralism and functionalism, those two branched off from there. Okay. So for structuralism, we have Wilhelm Wundt. He established the first experimental laboratory in Germany, where he started training the first generation of scientific psychologists. Structuralism believed that the mind can be understood by breaking it down into its basic components. So sort of like the way that chemistry did with the periodic table of elements, right? So they took all of the elements, broke them down into the building blocks, and then that's how they understand chemistry. So he was hoping to do the same with the mind, break it into its smaller parts, and then you can understand the whole better. So the question that he would ask would be, what are the building blocks of psychological experience? Okay. So he came up also with the therapy, a way of understanding this, working with patients, of introspection. Okay. So with introspection, they would show a participant, say, a visual object, or they would play music or something, and the people would be describing their own experiences. And that's how they would come to understand what the person was processing mentally, right? Now, the problem with this is that it's very subjective. You go by what people are reporting. Sometimes people say, if they're embellishing or lowering, or they don't understand something themselves. It's just a very subjective method. But still, moving forward with different methods of studying the mind. Around the same time, William James, who was a proponent of functionalism. So William James was inspired by evolutionary theory. So if you can think of evolutionary theory, That is about purpose, the purpose for things and how things evolve, right? So functionalism grew from there. So what he was saying is, don't just analyze behaviors or the building blocks, okay? Look at the purpose of behaviors and traits. Study the function. What is the causal relationships between internal states and observable behavior? And he also wrote the first textbook in psychology in 1890. So up until the 1930s, Sigmund Freud and his psychodynamic perspective really prevailed in the psychological community. So Freud was a young physician, actually, and he became interested in psychological problems because many of his patients, they were displaying physical symptoms that could not be explained by biological means, right? So he started looking at the mind as the place for the origins of these problems, okay? So motives and part of the mind we're unaware of in the unconscious. Physical symptoms like anxiety and paralysis, they're often manifestations of repressed, unresolved past conflicts. Many of the conflicts that he was talking about had to do with inborn sexual and aggressive drives that were punished in childhood and therefore were repressed, and they showed up later in life with physical presentations. So his method for treating mental illness was psychoanalysis, and he really put in the forefront things like defense mechanisms, repression, and different contexts that are really popular now. He brought in the psychology to include the study and treatment of psychological disorders. So one thing that's really important to notice is with each of these people who presented new ideas and such, they may have been, later refuted, like Freud's, and there's now jokes about that and whatnot. But at the time, they really do important contributions, and in the end, it's really important to notice how did they help determine the direction of psychology. So Freud's was that he was the one who brought the treatment of psychological disorders into the field of psychology. So next is the behavioral perspective. Everyone's heard of Pavlov in the early 1900s. So behaviorism asserts that behaviors are a result of stimulus-response relationships developed through interaction with the environment. Learning is basically when our events are associated with each other, either in a positive way, in a negative way, and it puts us in a very passive role in learning. So everyone remembers the experiments that he did with dogs, where dogs were automatically learned to salivate to the sound of a new stimulus, such as a tone, when it was repeatedly paired with food. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. So overall behavior rejected any reference to the mind. Psychology should only look at observable behavior. So the three types of behavioral learning that were founded by Pavlov in his experiments were the classical conditioning, which a neutral stimulus like a whistle is associated with a stimulus that has a natural response, like food, right? So you blow the whistle, you eat the food, blow the whistle, you eat the food, and then finally you blow the whistle and they salivate. Operant conditioning is a little bit different. So you can see there you've got a rat or mouse or whatnot in a box, and there's a lever there, and there's this little place where the food comes out. So nothing happens, and the rat can sit there for days. And then one day, the rat lowers or touches the lever, and a piece of food comes out. So they have to make the behavior first, and then they're rewarded for it. So in operant conditioning, a response is increased or decreased due to the reinforcement or punishment. So in this case, the rat is going to learn that every time he pushes the lever down, food comes out. And obviously, if you press the lever and it gets shocked, that's going to decrease the behavior. The third is observational learning, and this one is basically obvious. Learning occurs through observation and imitation of others. Behaviorism was the dominating perspective on psychology right up until around the 60s, when cognitive behaviorism emerged. So the big figure there is Albert Bandura, and he founded cognitive psychology, which concerned with concepts such as memory and decision making, different processes of the brain and decision making there. So Bandura, he merged the cognitive and the behavioral perspectives together to say that humans are thinking creatures. We don't just react to the environment like behaviorism says, saying we learn new behaviors by observing or actions of others. So the learning goes both ways, right? So the environment influences us, and we influence the environment. Okay, but there's no simple stamping of information into our brains or learning of behavior simply by pairing two stimulus. The environment affects our thoughts and gives us the information that we need to intentionally make decisions. So intentionally is a key word here. We are not passive creatures. We make these decisions, roll around the information that we need, and then act accordingly. So one therapy that came out of cognitive behaviorism was CBT, which I'm sure you've all heard of now. You see it in social media, and I wonder if anybody really knows what that is. Okay. So cognitive behavioral therapy asserts that there's like your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior all work together. Right? Your core beliefs and your automatic thoughts drive your behavior. So you can see the example on the right there. Situation, looking for jobs online when my computer stops working. So if the thought is, this is hopeless, nothing ever goes right, what's the point in even me trying? So those are the thoughts that's going to drive your behavior. The resulting behavior is you throw your computer and go back to bed and you cry. Your body perceives heavy feelings in their chest. This creates emotions of angry, sad, deflated, and anxiety. So the thoughts are the driving force here. So in CBT, the goal is to teach clients to be their own therapies. They learn to understand their ways of thinking. They learn that their thoughts are driving their behavior, right? They learn to become aware of their negative thoughts, and they learn ways to challenge those thoughts, right? Is this really true? Is it true that nothing ever goes right? Maybe the computer crashing is not a sign that I'm a complete loser and shouldn't be looking for a job. Maybe the computer crashed simply because the battery was low. Right? So they teach you to challenge your thoughts and then therefore perhaps change your behavior, which circulates into the changing of your body, how you feel things, and your emotions. So the last perspective we're going to look at is the humanistic perspective. And the name here is to be known as Maslow. And this came out in the 1950s. The humanistic perspective was a complete change from behaviorism. The humanistic perspective rejected that human beings are controlled by unconscious forces, and it rejected that humans were merely reacting to their environment. The humanistic perspectives emphasize that humans have an inborn drive towards self-actualization, reaching one's full potential. It asserted that humans have conscious motives, freedom, and choice. And when put in a supportive environment, this desire and drive towards self-actualization will move humans towards positive inner nature in a supportive environment, the positive inner nature of a person will naturally emerge. So humans are basically essentially good. And in a negative environment, that drive is suppressed and misery and pathology will occur. So the humanistic perspective is reflected in today's positive psychology movement. It emphasizes the study of human strengths, fulfillment, and optimal living. One theory that came out of here, and it's not in your textbook, and this won't be on the test, but it's prevalent in communities, in community youth organizations and youth programming. It's a different way of looking at youth development. Okay, it's called Positive Youth Development, PYD. So it originated from ecological systems theory and the humanistic perspective. Okay, and what it's asserting is that each developmental stage has unique strengths and abilities. So PYD focuses on enhancing young people's strengths, establishing engaging and supportive contexts, and providing opportunities for them to be successful. If you see there on the right, there's the 6 C's. And this is the framework for positive youth development. So it's saying that put youth in a supportive environment, teach them confidence, give them activities and opportunities to develop character, contribute, develop competence and connections, and they will grow into healthy, young, well-adjusted adults. So traditionally, many programs, let me just go back for a second, many programs dealing with youth, they would look to fix problematic behavior. Okay, so you have the youth, you find where their weak spots are, the problems are, and you work to fix those. Positive youth development takes a different approach. It's not looking to fix problematic behaviors, it's looking at youth as positive people who want to be successful. Okay, people who are driving towards self-actualization, right? Just like the humanistic perspective says. So the idea is to give them those opportunities to flourish, and they will. And the statement there at the bottom, problem-free is not fully prepared. So that's in reference to the old style where fix their problems and they should be good to go. And that's not the way that research is showing that youth develop. So what does PYD look like in the community? Just give you a practical application here. These are some of the programs, youth supporting programs that I work with in Southwestern Ontario. And all of these programs use the PYD framework in their programming. So, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So PYD contrasts from other problem-centered approaches where they focus on the problems. Youth have often been seen and portrayed as a problematic time, right? So language that you see everywhere, there's, bullies and at-risk youth and the learning disabled child, things that are happening in the media, the way youth is portrayed in the media. Okay, a study that we found said, according to a recent examination of 1 month of network and local TV news, they only showed 2% of teenagers were at home. 1% of them were working, but 20% of the views of youth in the social media were showing them in a criminal justice situation. Okay, so that's presenting to the community, presenting to society the problematic nature of youth. So this new PYD is a total, complete 180 change on that. It's not seeing them as problematic, and it just aims at understanding and educating and putting them in productive activities rather than trying to correct them. So again, there's the 5 C's: competence, confidence, connection, character, caring. So for example, with, say, confidence, a sense of self-worth and mastery, having a belief in one's capacity to succeed. So what we would do is we would look at these programs, say that they have the Boys and Girls Club or at YOU, And we would look at the programming and saying, okay, so where in this program are youth given the opportunity to build confidence? Where are they given the opportunity to grow connections and master skills, right? And supporting caring, sympathy, and empathy towards others, commitment to social justice. Another one that's come out of the research evidence is that youth really do need at least one positive, caring adult. So that's another part under number 5 that's built into the programs. So we use this as a framework to create this new style of PYD programming. So lastly, just based on the research, because we always look to research when we're developing new programs, research shows the 3 things you need to maximize positive youth development. Positive and sustained high-quality relationships with a coach, teacher, or mentor. That's the one adult I told you about. Teaching young people important skills, whether it's athletic skills, life skills, and having the opportunity to teach them to be good citizens. So that's giving them a chance to learn mastery of something and get better at something and build their confidence. And then give them the opportunity to use those skills in valued contexts, whether that's in sports or on committees or in social groups or employment. Okay, so we've reached the end of our chapter, second part of our chapter on the perspectives of behavior. Here's a little recap at the end. Okay, psychodynamic, about unconscious processes, behavioral, about learned behavior, humanistic, about learning to, striving to achieve, cognitive, about the thought processes, memory, decision making, whatnot. Sociocultural, that's in your text. I did not cover that here, but that is in the text. You'll see that there. And then biological, I would love to spend an hour on that as well. It's a really interesting area. But take a look at that in your text. Yeah. Okay. So that concludes chapter 1, and I look forward to seeing you in chapter 2.